Hello there, guys. Before we get going, I need to wait for this stream to appear on YouTube so I can play it back and make sure that I don't sound like a Dalek. Because in the last stream, the headphones were a little bit dodgy. Okay, that's good. Yeah, just heard myself. Do not sound like a Dalek. Fantastic. We can get going. I hope you're all doing well. Where to start? Where to start? Obviously, I'm going to have to talk about the Donald Trump tariffs because my God, it's happening. It's happening. Um, but before that, maybe I should go over the spring statement a little bit from last week as well. I'll be honest with you guys. As you can probably tell from the fact that I've not been streaming quite as frequently in the last few weeks as I had done before, I've become, I kind of ebb and flow a little bit. There's peaks and troughs with my sort of engagement with politics and how closely I want to follow things, how infused I am about them. And I think I have been on a bit of a lower ebb recently. There hasn't been an awful lot of good news really, whether it's Labour benefit cuts or Trump tariffs or ongoing God knows what's going to happen in the Ukraine war and all the rest of it. And we're still a little ways off from the local elections. The local elections will be fun. I love an election, as you know. So when we eventually end up getting up to the locals, that's when I'll probably end up being around a little bit more and looking at that. We'll have some fun. Obviously, we'll stream on the night of the local elections. Oh, there's a thought. I need to book up because it'll be a Thursday, won't it? It's always a Thursday. I need to book off the Friday from work if I want to stay up and do that. Okay, right. I'll have to make a note to myself to remember to do that sooner rather than later. All right then. So recapping the spring statement here, I'm just kind of going to go onto the BBC website here, and we've got at a glance. Chancellor Rachel Reeves had set out her plans for the UK economy during her spring statement in the House of Commons. It came as the Office for Budget Responsibility, which monitors the government's spending plans, unveiled its latest economic forecasts. Here is a summary of the main points. Welfare changes. Health-related universal credit for new claimants, which was already due to be cut from £97 to £50 per week from April 2026 under measures announced the previous week, will now not rise with inflation until after 2030. Under 22s will no longer be able to claim the health-related elements of universal credit. Also, as outlined the previous week, the existing claimants' health-related payments will be frozen at £97 a week until 2030, with a new top-up payment introduced for those with the most severe conditions. The standard allowance for universal credit will rise by £14 a week by 2030 instead of the £15 a week announced the week previously. I laugh, but it's not because I find it funny. Well, in a way, not in its consequences. There will be a stricter eligibility test for personal independence payments PIP, the main disability benefit from November 2026. So, kind of in a nutshell, from what I'd already said of what I've heard prior to the spring statement going, in part, I can see some of what they're trying to do there, but at the same time, I'm very concerned that they're probably going to end up pushing people who are already on the lower rung of the ladder economically into more hardship. And then with the revisions that they then made for what was announced in the spring statement, they've actually decided to go even further than that with more freezes or not raising things by the degree they would have before or whatever else. It just doesn't. It's not what I would have expected from Labour. I don't think it's what most people would naturally expect from Labour, to be honest with you. I know Labour's whole line is, oh, well, it's in our name, we're the party of Labour, working rather than, those wastrels on benefits. But, generally speaking, Labour Party, you think, right, centre-left political party, arguably, at least as opposed to say the Tories, they're supposed to be the ones that are generally looking out for the more disadvantaged, and that just doesn't really seem to be the case here, does it? We have a few people in the chat here. Enticing, good afternoon. Frank, good afternoon. Hello there. They're trying to prove they aren't supportive of socialism and mass immigration. Well, it's very interesting what's going on with Labour right now, because certain elements of where their politics and policies are at, and certainly in terms of the rhetoric, they have shifted to the right in some ways, but there also remain elements of their overall policy platform which are still embedded within sort of your centre left social democracy as well. So they're a sort of strange hybrid right now. I don't want to just use the really basic phrase saying that they're centrist, a little bit of left and a little bit of right, so therefore they're centrist, because centrist doesn't, I could say the Lib Dems are centrist, the One Nation Tories are centrist, the Social Democratic Party are centrist. I don't know what I'm exactly trying to say when I say centrist, but there are definitely parts of this Labour government now which feel quite Tory. And that's, I've often guarded against, I guess, when sort of friends who are very distinctly on like the I don't know what you want to call it, like the hard left, if you will. A lot of the time they'll say, well, there's no difference between Labour and the Tories anyway. They're basically just the Tories in disguise, and usually there's only so much I really want to agree with that and take it, because I feel that it's it probably speaks to the fact that they're more similar to one another than they are to the specific vision that you have of what you want the Labour Party to be. But for me, as I say, probably on the centre left rather than the left with a big capital L, I've still ended up quite disappointed and surprised at where they've shifted in some places. Now, in part on some of these areas of their rhetoric and all the rest of it, I've understood the fact that they're trying to combat reform. They're trying to win back the red wall, stuff like that, and that's why they've been leaning more into sort of like the so-called blue Labour types of rhetoric and policies, which I can understand from a political perspective at the very least. But nonetheless, there's something about these welfare changes which does not sit right with me. That does not feel like what you. I mean, I've got to admit, I didn't vote Labour in the last election, and partly it was a little bit of an indulgence on my part, because very clearly I wanted Labour to get in versus the Tories that had been in for so long beforehand. But because in my seat I knew that Labour were going to win anyway, I was able to indulge myself and go, "Oh, I'll vote for the Lib Dems," and then I can't be blamed for anything unpopular that Labour does because I didn't vote for them. But this really is probably the first thing where I've actually gone, yeah, you know what? I think I'm quite glad that I didn't vote for them. If they're doing that, it's not what I expect of Labour, of a so-called sort of centre-left social democratic party, really. But it's a strange one under Starmer right now, because he's a little bit of everything. You can't really pin down what Starmer's ideology is. Even if you were to criticize him from the left, if you were to say, oh, he's right wing or he's too right wing, that still oversimplifies it. He's a mix and match of all kinds of things, and I suppose he himself. I think there was a book. I've forgotten who it was written by, but it was called Get In. And there were lots of interviews about it doing the rounds a few months ago, and they had spoken to a lot of insiders within the Labour Party machinery, and one of the quotes from Starmer that had emerged from this was him saying something like, "There will never be a Starmer-ism." It's sort of Starmer saying that he's guided completely by pragmatism, that he'll make each decision on the basis of that decision that's in front of him, not that there's an overriding ideology governing him. And I suppose at the very least I can say, well, the way that the Labour government has turned out so far, that seems to align with what Starmer was reported to have said, because they're not really following along specific expected lines in all the ways that you would expect them to. It's a weird one. It's like on the one hand they got in and they settled a bunch of disputes with striking people in unions, and you go, oh yeah, that's what you'd expect, like, a Labour Party to do or something. And then they've got their workers' rights bill that they're bringing through, and again you go, oh yeah, that's what you'd expect from sort of like from them. But then other areas like this, changes to benefits, or putting out promotional videos about them deporting people and other stuff like that, you go, that's a tinge in a different direction there. But in a way, I suppose, much as apparently Starmer does not have a Starmerism, and he makes a decision on a issue by issue basis, that's kind of the way that I'm having to get a feel for this current Labour Party, really. I can't easily pin down exactly where they are politically. They are a little bit of centre left, a little bit of centre right, and bits in other ways as well. So it doesn't seem that like there's not a coherent. It doesn't feel like there's a coherent overall vision to everything, or that you could reasonably be able to predict what policies they'll have in specific areas as they emerge. So yeah, I think as things currently stand, were there to be an election tomorrow, I'd probably be voting Liberal Democrat again, to be honest with you. Which is very strange to say, considering you guys, any of you guys who watched me during the Brexit years, that would have been an unfathomable thing for me to do. But given that we've left the EU, and this iteration of the Lib Dems under Ed Davey is quite different in regards to say, was it Joe Swinson, Tim Farron, then Joe Swinson. But I was very unhappy with them back when they were trying to basically stop us from leaving the EU after the country had voted for it. I couldn't countenance that at all. I thought that was utterly wrong. But there's only so long I want to hold a grudge, and they seem to have accepted that, yeah, obviously they still want to be in the EU, but they're not trying to have that argument right now of going, and we would rejoin tomorrow if we got into power, or what have you. So I can put that to the side for the time being. And they've been quite strong on Trump. Now, this is the thing. I've made this point before as well about the Liberal Democrats. It's very easy for them to do what they're doing because they are a minor party, not in government, not the main opposition. They've got 70 odd MPs, something like that. Effectively, they are in prime position to be able to say, oh, isn't this Donald Trump terrible? Oh, we should be buying British. Oh, we should be, calling the ambassadors and having a good old finger wag at them and telling them off and all this sort of thing. And obviously, if they were the party of government, I would assume they would be behaving slightly differently, because then the reality of them actually having to be the ones with diplomatic ties with the government of America would kick in. But nonetheless, in the situation we're in right now, it's nice, I think, to have Ed Davey and the Lib Dems there within the political spectrum, sort of articulating that point of view, the fuck you Donald Trump point of view. It's quite appealing to me at the moment, it's got to be said. Especially versus, when you look at Starmer and the government right now, where we've been hit by 10% tariffs, which on the one hand, across the spectrum of all the countries being hit by tariffs, some of them up to like 50% or something, you go, okay, we've got away relatively unscathed. The EU was 20%, so-called Brexit benefit there. We were only 10%, hey ho. But nonetheless, you are also having to accept the reality of, this is America. Supposedly one of our allies, although that's become incredibly questionable in recent months. Now, slapping 10% tariffs on us, which is obviously going to hurt us. That's clearly not good. And the government at the moment, they're saying nothing's off the table. They're looking, they're saying, oh, maybe we might end up doing reciprocal tariffs against the states on certain things, but they're still holding out hope for some kind of a a deal right now, partly pertaining to tech and AI, I think, but also hoping to try and maybe smooth or wipe off some of those tariffs in the process as well. I've got no idea how successful they're going to be. I'm not holding out an awful lot of hope, really. And ultimately, I think that if they aren't able to succeed with that, then I think I'd like to see us slowly start moving towards the position of, growing a little bit more backbone and pushing back a little bit, perhaps with some reciprocal tariffs of our own. I agree so far as to say that we don't need to suddenly knee-jerk announce something this very minute. We can think about it. We can see what the situation is. We can see if these negotiations pan out. But if and when the writing is ultimately on the wall in a few weeks or months' time, and we see what's happening, then yeah, I think we should be looking out for our own interests as well, which probably will involve having to push back against them. So we'll see what ends up coming with that right now. Let me go through a few of your comments here, because I've managed to weave. Speaking of Donald Trump, I've done a weave. I've weaved from talking about the spring statement and Labour onto Donald Trump and tariffs via the Liberal Democrats. Quite impressive, if you ask me. What are you guys saying in the chat here? James Fielding is here and says, hello, Captain, or afternoon, Captain. Richmond also in bed says, Swiss, after door knocking, I have made a big decision. I won't be running in 2029. Everyone hates me and my party for the rich in Stoke. I'm shocked. Absolutely shocked. What else do we have here? Sky Echo 7 says, the EU wouldn't have us tomorrow, so I voted Remain and wouldn't want a full rejoin, to be honest. Customs Union would be a good move, though, in my opinion. Need a few MPs that are able to think first, Swizz. So yeah, I've seen I've seen probably what you guys have seen in the past day or so, which is the announcement of all of these tariffs and the stock markets taking a little bit of a tumble. From what I've read, analysis-wise, it doesn't seem like we're kind of like in crash territory yet. Sort of crash. A crash is sort of, you're talking about a drop of maybe like 20 or more % within the space of a day or two. I think what I'd read earlier today, the Great Depression, the Wall Street crash of the late 1920s. I may not be quoting this correctly. I forget what number it said happened within a day or two. It might have been 20%, but it sort of said within a few weeks it had dropped 50% of where it had been, and that's obviously apocalyptic. And I think in the 1980s, 1990s. I know that we had a crash in the 1990s. I don't know if it was the same for the Americans, if they had one in the 80s. But anyway, the point was that there was another example there of when there had been sort of a so-called crash where it's kind of like a very significant sort of 20% or more drop within the space of a few days. So we're not quite there at the moment, but of course, this is very early days. This is very early days. The amount of economic uncertainty at the moment in the markets is reaching rather frenzied heights. And simply put, we just don't know where things are going to go. It's unpredictable, really. You don't know which countries are going to retaliate in what way. You don't know whether the Americans will then retaliate in kind against them. We don't know how far this ends up going, which countries are going to be pushed into a recession or not. But it's not good. It's not a good outlook, to be honest with you. I saw something from apparently Alan Sugar says that he thinks that Trump will do away with all this tariff nonsense within a couple of months. And again, I just don't know. I just don't know. One would assume that if the economic mood music really does turn so badly, including for the Americans, that would prompt a rethink. You'd imagine that even some of the rather sycophantic devotees in the Republican Party would eventually put their sensible heads on and say, I know Donald Trump is our guy, so to speak, but he's he's hurting everyone with this shit right now. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see. But all I can say is it's not looking particularly good, is it? Sky Echo 7 says, "Are you talking about the Tory fiscal monetary responsibility crashing the pound in the ERM Swiss 80s and 90s?" There was that was our example, wasn't it? We had we had a crash to do with the exchange rate mechanism. I'm trying to remember if what I'd read was an example given pertaining to the Americans, and maybe where I got confused is ours was it Black Wednesday? I feel like it was a Wednesday. I want to say Black Wednesday. Part of me's thinking Black Monday, but I want to say Black Wednesday. That we had that in sort of the early 1990s, but there was something that I'd read that the Americans had something. Maybe it was in the 80s. Maybe it was a different day of the week with the prefix black in front of it, something like that. But I'm getting too tied into all of that really, and second guessing myself. The point I was trying to make is, as far as the response to the tariffs in the stock markets go, thus far, we're not in the territory of describing it as a crash. But wait and see where things go. That's the overall point that I was trying to make there, really. I've also been spending the last, I mean, I said to you guys in the most recent stream, I've been listening to a lot of the Rest is History podcast, and I've got quite into my history again in the last couple of weeks. I've been researching where my surname comes from, Dilworth, and it used to be a little township. Well, it still is technically. It used to be a little township near Ribchester or Longridge these days, in the Ribble Valley in Lancashire. And it was actually recorded in the Doomsday Book in the 1080s, 1086, I think it was. And back then Dilworth was called, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but something like Billerud. And obviously at some point the B turned to a D, and there were like a bunch of different spellings of it over the course of the next few hundred years. There was Dilworth, Dillard, Dillsworth, Dillila, you know, all sorts. But it was fascinating looking at some of that kind of stuff, because it's quite an uncommon surname. You know, it's not like it's a Smith or a Jameson or whatever else. You know, it's a surname specifically linked to that particular location. And my granddad was born in a town only about 10 or 15 miles away from where this little Dilworth township was. So it's a dead cert that my male ancestors come from Dilworth at one point in time. And looking back at it, like in the early, I don't know, I want to say the 1100s, 1200s, roundabout then, there are a few people known as D Dilworth, DE, like meaning of or from, D Dilworth. There was a William de Dilworth, an Egbert de Dilworth, and at one point in time they were actually small-time sort of landowners or tenants, but probably owners in that area. And then looking through it even further, about 100 or 200 years later after that, they got bought out by a different family, and then the records ceased to have any landowning Dilworths in that area. But the little township was actually the largest settlement in its immediate vicinity for quite a long time. It was only in the 1800s that Longridge, neighbouring it, sort of popped up because of different industries there, and eventually kind of consumed the town, and the township of Dilworth ceased to exist. But even to this day, there's still a street called Dilworth Lane, and there's still an area within the Ribble Valley in like local government elections in the Ribble Valley. There's still a ward called Dilworth, which covers roughly the area where this township was supposed to be. So all of that stuff I've found just fascinating, really. But partly because growing up, I didn't really know many people from my dad's side of the family, so it was always a little bit of a mystery to me about Dilworths, and you know, it wasn't a surname I ever really came across meeting other people. So I've just been looking into that, and that's very interesting. So I've got like a little side projects at the moment where I'm compiling all this different research and getting AI chatbots to help me and other stuff. So maybe one day I'll do a proper video about all that stuff, or I might even write a little book or something. But I've been finding that stuff just absolutely fascinating. looking into it all. Um, what do we have here in the chat? What else have we got? 71, Nixon did what Trump has just done and massively increased tariffs, says Sky Echo 7. Leeball says Norman Lamont singing Je ne regrette rien in the bath. Claire King says, watch this Swiss finds out he owns land in 10 years. And Leeball says you could be the next Dave Gorman. Yeah, for the record, the thing that I've not been able to ascertain is whether or not I am directly descended from these landowning Dilworths, formerly known as D. Dilworth, eventually just Dilworth, whether I'm descended from them or whether I'm descended from just other people who lived in and around the township that also round about that time adopted the surname Dilworth because that's where they were from. I guess you could argue, what with them all being in close proximity to one another, maybe somewhere along the lines, one person's offspring and another person's offspring brings those trees together. I don't know, but there's I'm not laying claim to being minor nobility from 1,000 years back or anything like that. But nonetheless, it's just fascinating to me that that's where my surname comes from. And there's actually a sort of buried history there that place no longer really exists in any sort of significance. There's not really a named place on a map called Dilworth anymore, and yet there's still little signs of the fact that it used to be known as that around the place, and little records of it as well. And about 3 miles away from it, there's the Roman town fort town of Ribchester. And this is going back 2,000 years. And they discovered what they think was a path of an old Roman road leading from Ribchester, joining up with a different Roman road up towards Lancaster. And the route of this Roman road goes right through where Dilworth was. Now, obviously, this is 1,000 years prior to Dilworth being in the Doomsday Book. But again, you could go, oh, okay, so maybe in part this little settlement actually built up around the fact that there was a Roman road there at one point in time. I honestly think at some point I'm going to go visit the place myself and do a little bit of investigating and see what I can dig up, either literally or physically. No, metaphorically or literally. We shall see. But yeah, I know that doesn't pertain to politics, but it's like, when you've been spending that much time doing something for the past few weeks, you kind of need to tell someone. You need to share what you found with somebody, or it almost doesn't feel worth it. Anyway, folks, Claire King says summer vlog fundraising for it. Well, you know what? I've obviously had that plan of mine, which has been on the back burner for absolutely forever, of wanting to do sort of like a little journey of the country and vlogging my way along, and sort of just going to random towns and discovering stuff and all the rest of it. But I think if I were to do, I'm slowly refining that idea, and I think what it's going to involve now is basically a pilgrimage to Dilworth. Oh, that sounds like fun. Yeah. Oh, pilgrimage to Dilworth. That works. Yeah. So that definitely at some point. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, it could be this summer. I could book some time off and do it then, couldn't I? I'm looking at starting a new apprenticeship at work at the moment, so I'm going to be tethered to what I'm doing, where I'm doing it for a while. But if I wanted to book a big chunk of holiday off in one go, I could maybe see. Claire King says, I donate £100. Well, hey, that would be most welcome. Anyway, guys, I kind of just wanted to. Oh my god, I've been screen sharing the bloody welfare changes for. I didn't even read the rest of the article. I just went on welfare changes and then started talking about Labour and Trump and Dilworth, and I never even got to the rest of the to the rest of this on the screen. And here was me about to wrap up the stream. Oh dear. All right, let's read a little bit more of this before we go then. The Office for Budget Responsibility has downgraded predicted growth this year from 2% to 1%, but it has upgraded estimated growth for the next 4 years. No. You can go look at it yourself. What do I have to tell you? Growth is probably going to be relatively anemic, because it generally is always relatively anemic. And obviously these forecasts from the Office of Budget Responsibility are all well and good, But given the fallout of a global trade war and Trump tariffs, they've probably all been bloody thrown out the window already. How on earth can any of these be relatively accurate when all this new stuff's now come along, which is going to throw a cat amongst the pigeons? They've really cornered themselves with these fiscal rules, Labour, at the moment, because things are getting choppier and choppier in the global economy. And if they're going to be sticking to what they said they were going to do, then they're constantly going to be having to snip away. I mean, they can't go raiding welfare again, you'd hope. I guess part of me still thinks sooner or later they're going to have to go back on their campaign pledges and raise taxes in one form or another. But I think they're very keen not to be seen to be going back on their campaign pledges at the moment. But yeah. And we might get some more houses built as well. That's the thing. Let me read some more of this. Frank says, also we're about to enter a bear market. Yeah, Frank had said, I know it's quite off topic, but are you looking forward to the new series of Doctor Who? Oh, yes. Okay, I'll talk about that for a minute. Not really is unfortunately the answer. I felt I found the most recent series of Doctor Who kind of a bit underwhelming, to be honest, which is a shame because I had very high hopes for Russell T Davies coming back as showrunner. And Ncuti Gatwa, from what I saw of him in like the 60th anniversary special where he debuted, seemed quite impressive. And I thought, oh, okay, yeah, maybe it's getting back on a good footing again. But it was very hit and miss. His first season of Doctor Who, very hit and miss for me. So I and what concerns me as well is that I think that the second season, which is still to come, obviously, that was filmed and recorded, I think, either before the first season came out or during when the first season was debuting. But the point being is that they kind of had 2 seasons of Doctor Who in the can before they even started getting proper feedback from what they put out already. And that says to me that there's been no prospect of them being able to course correct. That it was quite mixed reviews of the most recent season of Doctor Who, but given that they'd already made the upcoming season, they weren't able to sort of feed back into that and go, oh, right, okay, this is what the response and the reaction has been. We might need to tighten this up or change this or focus on that. They've not had an opportunity to do that. So it seems a little bit up in the air at the moment whether or not this Disney deal with Doctor Who continues, or what the fate of another season after this one is, or all the rest of it. I'll end up checking it out because I'm curious to see how it is. But to be totally honest with you, I've not really been properly into Doctor Who since Peter Capaldi was the Doctor in sort of like the mid 2010s. I thought he was really good. But they kind of lost me with the Chris Chibnall, Jodie Whittaker years. I didn't think much of that really. And then unfortunately the same with the Russell T Davies round 2 and Ncuti Gatwa. So it would take a much longer dedicated stream for me to kind of go into all of my thoughts about it, but that's kind of the overall thing. So yeah, I'll be looking to see how it goes, but I'm not holding out too much hope at the moment. Which, to be honest, is like the quintessential Doctor Who fan thing to say, isn't it? Because there's nothing Doctor Who fans love more than to shit on the current state of Doctor Who. You know, my awareness of Doctor Who fans going back to like the 70s and the 80s is that they're a bunch that can never really be pleased. What are the rest of your comments here? There's a historic feud between balls like myself and ballses like Ed, says Lee Ball. Sky Echo 7 says Reeves had the perfect excuse to legitimately change her fiscal rules like EU countries did, but chose to hit the poorest and the most vulnerable just to say, I'm a good chancellor. Frank says there is also going to be an entire episode about an intergalactic version of the Eurovision Song Contest. I mean, as a premise, that's pretty interesting to me. I've got to admit. I love a bit of Eurovision. Claire King says, I don't know, I think Doctor Who peaked about 10 years ago. It needs to be put on ice for a few years. Perhaps, yeah. I think I never would have said that I wanted Doctor Who to be cancelled, but to be honest, maybe that would do it some good. Maybe just, you know, there's a phrase. I'm completely jumping from forms of entertainment here, but there's a phrase from Jim Cornette, who's a manager, and nowadays a podcaster in wrestling. And there's a thing that he says, which is, we can't miss you if you never go away. Talking about like wrestlers that are on TV too much, and you know the crowd aren't really that into them. But maybe if they're away for 6 months or a year because of an injury, when they finally come back, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, it's them again." You know, that's kind of like it with Doctor Who. I think I can't miss Doctor Who and want to see Doctor Who because it's still here. It never leaves. You need it to go before you then want it to come back again. But we'll see. You know, I'm not necessarily calling for it to be cancelled. I just want to see how things go with it for the time being. Lee Ball says it peaked with cancellation, in my opinion. That is you, absolute heretic. Peaked with cancellation. That'll be the Doctor Who EastEnders crossover during those years. Was that for like Children in Need or Red Nose Day or something like that? That's a thing. Don't watch it. Don't just pretend it doesn't exist. Skyco7 says, "Wait, how do we get onto Doctor Who?" Bloody time machine would be useful now, though. To be fair, yeah, I've been a little bit all over the shop today, but to be honest, I kind of wanted to just touch on a few things of the past week and just speak about my own interests of what I've been doing lately. Obviously, months and months and months ago, I'd said to you guys I was looking to pivot the direction of the channel away from just political content to do all sorts of different stuff. And then I kind of feel that since the beginning of this year, especially with all the sort of Donald Trump happenings, I've definitely got much more bogged down in the political again. So I'm probably going to try and make a conscious effort to diversify out to some more different stuff again. As I say, absolutely local elections, we'll be doing those because I love me an election. But be warned that some of the stuff you get out of me in the near future may well be, I don't know, playing some video games or talking about history or films or, you know, or Doctor Who or what have you. But there we are. Anyway, folks, it's been nice to catch up with you guys again. I hope you're all well. Enjoy your weekend, and drop the stream a like if you haven't already. Thank you very much. Catch you later on. Ta-ta.